Well, good morning. I apologize in advance if this is a little disjointed. I decided to rewrite my sermon after I heard of the death of Congressman John Lewis. So here's the deal. This gospel annoys me. This gospel actually, Matthew's pushing all of my buttons this morning. I'm going to say it. I don't care for this story. I know you think it's because of the outcome, but truth be told, there are a lot of problems with this sermon. As they say on Twitter, this does not check out. First off, the idea that the good seed will produce wheat only. Now, for the purposes of this sermon and my ability to get words out of my mouth, I'm going to use the paraphrase from the message, and instead of referring to the weeds as weeds, we're just going to call them thistles, because later you will see me trying to say wheat and weed in the same sentence is not a good thing. So we have wheat and we have thistles. All right. So he put good seed out into a non-thistled field in theory, and yeah, I guess, I don't know about seeds other than I was out protesting at one point in time about Monsanto and seeds, but that's another life and another story. Perhaps you can get seeds that are perfect and that there's no, absolutely guaranteed no ability to have a weed seed mixed in. But even still, good seed on soil that's out in the world also produces weeds. There are thistles everywhere. I've planted a lot of seeds, good seeds, and I've dug up a lot of thistles. As a matter of fact, I used to have a great lawn in Minnesota. Back when I did things like care about my lawn, I dug out the dandelions, and one year, all of a sudden, thistle starts appearing. Now, if you're not sure what thistle is, it's big, it's bold, it's green, it's spiky, it's nasty to take out of the ground. You always get a thistle in your finger at least once. So I was wondering where all these thistle seeds came from, and the woman across the street came over who had an opinion about everything, God bless her, and she said, well, it's that woman down the street. I'm like, excuse me, which woman? She goes, it's that woman. She's putting thistle in her bird feeder. Okay. So apparently, even if you have good soil and good seed, those birds will defecate thistle into your life. Just saying. So, this idea of good seed produces only good results is, I say, hokum. Hokum, I say. So that bothers me. And don't even get me started about the representation of sin or evil or missing the mark as a personification of the devil or the enemy. That also is not one of my favorite theological stances in the world. I mean, I guess it can be helpful to think of an outside force that through no fault of our own, thistles are caused. I mean, the story is going off the rails, right? If you don't weed, even if you believe there's not many thistles in your wheat, you still would go out and weed them. But no, the homeowner says, nope, don't worry about it. We'll take care of that at the end. And I remembered preaching a sermon where I was told very clearly that in the ancient Near East, weeds were always these things called tares, and tares and wheat were impossible to tell apart. So this is good theology. Hokum, I say hokum. This does not help me at all to think about it. We don't wait till the end. I mean, it's all mental gymnastics to make this story work, because the gospel is truth, right? Because this story is so annoying, we sort of miss some deeper theological realities here. How does thistle look like wheat? And if you're already thistle, can you ever become wheat? And if you're wheat, do you ever become thistle? I mean, the way that I've lived my life, I make choices to move towards God, which are really wheaty choices, but my thistle-y choices of drifting away from God, I become wheat and thistle in the same second, let alone living my whole life as true and pure. So I think that it really is this binary story that doesn't help us figure out who we are. It's not helpful. It's not helpful how we live our lives as people. And if you listen to this story, heart and whole, and take it all in, the moral of the story is to keep your little wheatie head down and hope no one thinks you're thistle. See how I didn't want to say wheat? Wheatie head, weedy head, wheat, thistle. Are we both and? I think we are. And I know in my life, keeping my head down is not always the choice I should make. Think about what's going on in the world. Think about what you saw in the paper this morning if you looked at the paper. We have money not being spent on a cessation of a global pandemic. We're not going to test. We're not going to contact trace. We shouldn't spend the money to do that. The only way this is actually going away is for us to stay away from each other, to wear our masks, and to do things like contact tracing and testing. It's not going to be in the bill? Are you kidding me? I'm not going to keep my head down about that. Think about the financial crisis that's happening right now. In my home country of Canada, people are getting paid to stay home. People are being supported so they can keep their homes. Here, July 1, they could start eviction proceedings against people. Now, let's think about that as good Christian people trying to become wheat. We're going to kick people out of their homes where they can't have access to clean running water during a global pandemic. I believe this is thistly thought on our part. We can't keep our heads down. And what is going on in Portland, Oregon? We have unmarked forces from possibly DHS arresting people, taking them away in unmarked cars. I mean, I'm not one to jump the gun and panic here, but the term disappearing people is jumping into my head. Pinochet is jumping into my head. This is not the country that we should be looking away. This may well break out to be a constitutional crisis. This is not the time to keep our heads down and hope that people think we're wheat and not thistle. Which brings me to Congressman John Lewis, who, as you know, is known for getting into good trouble. John Lewis said this once: "You cannot be afraid to speak up and speak out for what you believe. You have to have courage, raw courage. You cannot be afraid to speak up. You have to call out that we need money for this pandemic. We have to keep people in their homes. We have to call out the government for arresting people in unmarked vehicles and unmarked people." Senator Kamala Harris said, "In the memory of John Lewis, let's continue to speak out against injustice and have the courage to make good trouble." It is saying that we believe that if we say something with a lot of power, with a lot of force, with our deep-seated beliefs in the mix, we can enter into a conversation. You can't keep your head down and have a conversation. You have to, at times, say what you believe and put your stakes in the ground. John Lewis did that. John Lewis said what he meant, and he stood by it. He marched for it. He rode for it. He was jailed for it, and he put himself on the line for it, both physically and mentally and emotionally, again and again and again. One of the stories I love that has come out about Congressman Lewis is that one of the men who beat him at one time in his life drove to Washington, D.C., got an appointment with him, and apologized and asked for John Lewis's forgiveness. And John Lewis, without hesitating, said, "Of course I forgive you. That's what this movement is about. We work together." And I would say that we work for the kingdom of God. We are all kin. We would honor John Lewis by holding accountable the powers who will not pass a law that open the way for all people to vote. I mean, there are people who are saying nice things about him now that he's dead and gone. No, you want to honor this man? Pass the Voting Rights Act. Voting rights in this country have been stripped away in the last decade. People, you want to judge folks for not voting? Do you want to stand in the hot sun for 5 to 6 to 8 hours to get your vote cast? We can't judge people when there's only one voting station open for 100,000 people. This is not right. We have to stand up to this. We can't put our little heads down and hope someone notices that we're wheat. We can't look away, for the world needs us to stir up our collective voices and honor what Congressman Lewis did, not to hold ourselves away and hope for the best. Maybe they'll think I'm wheat, although I might be secretly thistle because I'm making good trouble. The Jesus I follow calls me to act out and act into what's happening in the world today. We are called by God, by our conscience, by our high-mindedness to reach out to our government and say the abuses of our relatives dying, because all of these people, these 140,000 people, are our relatives. If they died in the United States, that's the number. If they died in the entire world, it's many, many more. They are all our relatives. We are called by our conscience, by our high-mindedness, to say that it's abusive. We cannot sit in a field with our little weedy heads down and hope that the inactions and let the thistles of power, the thistles of fear, the thistles of DHS overreach choke out the life that we have been given. Do not sit back. There is a harsh judgment leveled on our generation. It will not be by the Son of Man in this story of Jesus explaining what's going on in this story. We will not be judged harshly by the Son of Man. We will be judged harshly by history if we don't lift up our heads, if we don't call it out, if we don't call out this sinful and broken way in which this world is acting. We need to call it some good trouble. We need to cause some good trouble, some necessary trouble. We need to do it in the name of Congressman John Lewis. We need to do it in the name of our relatives. We need to do it because we are followers. And we are called people who are to act in this world as wheat and not thistles. Amen.